Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm your host Canadian Crypt, and today I'm going to be going over my top picks for the 1970s. This was a really difficult list for me to make because narrowing down one film per year in a decade where so many great films were released is quite the challenge. So if our lists don't match up, it doesn't mean they're bad, it just means I have films that I enjoy a little bit more than others, and plus at the end of the day, I'm just some guy on the internet. My opinion really doesn't matter. But before I get into it, if you're new to the channel, be sure to hit subscribe and click the little bell below to keep up to date with new horror content every Monday and Friday. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. Starting off with 1970, we have the Grindhouse classic, I Drink Your Blood. If you're unfamiliar with the film, it follows a group of hippie Satanists that end up wreaking havoc on a small town. But after attacking a young boy's family, he comes up with a revenge plan to feed the Satanist group a bunch of pies that he had infected with rabies. But this plan horribly backfires when it turns the group into bloodthirsty zombies. Moving on to 1971, we have the Hammer film classic Twins of Evil.
Oh God, have mercy on this poor, unfortunate creature.
If you're unfamiliar, it follows Frida and Maria, two orphan twins that go off to live with their uncle Gustav. Now Gustav is actually the leader of a religious group that would go off and hunt down women accused of witchcraft, while killing multiple innocent people in the process. But things take a turn when Frida becomes obsessed with the evil Count Karnstein, an advocate of black magic who ends up turning her into a vampire. Moving on to 1972, we have the anthology horror classic Tales from the Crypt. The film was directed by Freddie Francis and is actually based on the old EC comics by the same name. The film follows a group of tourists who get lost within ancient catacombs only to run into a sinister crypt keeper who would end up telling them how they would die. We have the holy grail of possession films, and of course you know we're talking about The Exorcist. The film was directed by William Friedkin, and it follows a young girl named Regan who is possessed by a demonic spirit, which leads them to bring in an exorcist to save her soul. Moving on to 1974, we have Tobe Hooper's slasher masterpiece, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The film follows two siblings along with their group of friends as they drive through rural Texas on their way to an old family home. But on their way, things take a horrific turn when they run into a family of violent and hungry cannibals. This film also spawned Leatherface, a character that would go on to become one of the most iconic horror villains in history. Moving on to 1975, we have Deep Red, directed by the master of giallo film, Dario Argento. After witnessing the brutal murder of a known medium, jazz musician Marcus Daly takes it into his own hands to go out and investigate and find the killer. During his investigation, he is joined by a local news reporter, but every time they would come up with a lead, that person would be killed off. Moving on to 1976, we have potentially the greatest Stephen King film adaptation, and of course we're talking about Carrie. The film was directed by Brian De Palma, and it follows Carrie White, a young antisocial girl who is the victim of daily ridicule because of her religious freak mother. But after being pushed a step too far, we see a brand new, dark, and powerful side to Carrie. David Cronenberg's body horror masterpiece, Rabid. The film follows a woman named Rose, who after a motorcycle accident is hospitalized and given an experimental procedure, which turns her into a violent killer, turning her victims into bloodthirsty rabid freaks. Alright, moving on to my absolute favorite year for horror, and that is 1978 with my favorite horror film of all time, Halloween. This was the film that made John Carpenter a horror legend. After escaping a mental hospital, psychotic killer Michael Myers returns home to Haddonfield 15 years after he murdered his sister. Now he's out for blood on a hunt for his next victim. I honestly can't say enough good about this movie, and in my opinion, it's the perfect slasher film. Plus, you got an awesome performance from Donald Pleasance as Dr. Sam Loomis, so you can't lose.
Because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
Alright, last but not least, for 1979, I chose a movie that I think is 100% underrated, 100% underappreciated, and that film is Tourist Trap. The film was directed by David Schmoller and stars the late Chuck Connors. The film follows a group of friends out on a road trip who end up breaking down out front of an old wax museum / resort called Slosson's Lost Oasis. It's there where they encounter a masked killer who uses his telekinetic powers to control the museum's mannequins, turning them into living wax figures. This film actually has one of my favorite horror kills in it, and that's when the killer suffocates one of the victims by covering her face in plaster. It's not necessarily a gory kill, but I think that would just be a horrible, terrifying way to die. Also, if you're a fan of random laughing mannequins, this is probably the movie for you. Thank you guys so much for checking out the list. I plan to make a series of this for the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and so on and so forth. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe. I will see you guys in the next video. Stay scary.